The fasting mimicking diet looks about giving you the ability to have a fasting response, just as if you were getting water-only fasting, but also making sure that you do it with healthy ingredients. You're burning energy because you're still digesting. So you have these fibers, you have these healthy ingredients. At the same time, it gives you a lot of the benefits of fasting. So I always say, I challenge anyone to come up with something that could cause more changes in the human body than 5 days of fasting or a fasting mimicking diet.
I'm Dr. Esra, and I've been living a sober life for the past 18 years. My battle with addiction drove me to seek new methods, devices, and supplements to improve my physical and mental performance, enhance my quality of life, and ultimately live healthier for longer. From my experiences in addiction recovery, biohacking, and longevity to the latest global developments, from groundbreaking entrepreneurs to expert academics, the conversations I've had over the years are now featured weekly on Soberhead Podcast. Welcome to Soberhead Podcast. This week, we're thrilled to be joined by Dr. Valter Longo, one of the world's leading experts on aging and longevity research. He's best known for developing the fasting mimicking diet, a revolutionary approach to harnessing the body's natural ability to heal and regenerate. As director of the Longevity Institute at the University of Southern California, Dr. Longo has spent decades studying how nutrition and controlled fasting can dramatically improve health, slow aging, and reduce the risk of chronic diseases like diabetes and cancer. In this conversation, we explore the science behind FMD, compare it to traditional fasting methods, and learn practical tips for living longer, healthier lives. Get ready for an inspiring look at the power of food as medicine and how you can start making changes today. Here is something that is fascinating. A huge amount of people who watch this channel frequently are not subscribed. So I want to ask you a quick favor. When you subscribe, it helps us to make the show better, access to the world-leading experts, and ultimately bring you more value. All that I ask is for you to hit the subscribe button, and in return, I promise we will make Ayık Kafa better every day. Dr. Valter Longo, welcome to Soberhead Podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, for the last, I want to say, decade, this whole fasting mimicking diets, calorie restriction is playing a crucial role in this longevity approaches of people. I had a chance to listen to a couple of podcasts that you were in. I quickly scanned over your books, and more or less I can say that I now understand your philosophy of it. But before that, let me ask you, what made you interested into longevity? Then what made you interested into finding that eating style, I want to say, because, diet.
Longevity is all I've ever done. And so since my second year in college, I've been doing research on aging and longevity. Eventually, I joined many years ago the laboratory of Roy Walford at UCLA, and he was a medical doctor. At the time, he was the most famous person in the planet for nutrition, calorie restriction and aging. And so I was already interested in that. But then I think after that, they became the center, both the genetics of aging and the role of nutrition and calorie restriction in aging became the center of my research.
Mm-hmm. So your research is in aging. Also, you have multiple different researches, correct? Like on cancer and diabetes, like everything is around the diet, I guess. You're trying to resolve these issues with diet.
Yeah, I think we're trying to resolve these issues with activating the ability of the body to repair itself. Mm-hmm. So then the diet and the fasting and the different techniques that we use are just to begin a process of self-repair and also a process of making systems younger. The diet and the restriction are just tools to activate those. So I always give the example of, a cut. So if you cut yourself, everything is repaired almost perfectly. And so because that can be done on the skin, we see evidence that this can be done almost everywhere in the body. And so there's like a very sophisticated clinic, let's say, that has the job of repairing many different things. And so that's what we try to activate. Yeah.
So then let me just straight up get into the fasting mimicking diet, FMD conversation, my questions, because, as I started with water fasting, 5 days fasting, 5 to 2, there's Mindy Pels saying her own approach. There are many people. Mindy was at my podcast as well. We discussed about fasting. Dr. Pampa is going to be coming. So they all have different angles. But what's different, FMD versus, let's say, water fasting or calorie restriction? Because FMD has the kind of fasting mimicking diet, because I'm on my second round, actually. I did one last month. Today is my second day. It's much easier to do the second time around. And I know that you designed something to help human biology. So what makes it different than the other type of fastings?
I always say fasting doesn't really mean anything, right? Fasting is like eating. So if you were asking me, what does eating do to people? I will tell you, well, there's like a million different things, right? That people can eat or not, right? So, yeah, so fasting is the same way. So I think we need to move away from words like fasting or intermittent fasting and move into food is medicine, right? And so exactly what is it that made what and how was that demonstrated, right? So this is why we like to make it, have epidemiological studies, have clinical studies, have basic research. How do you make a mouse live longer? And how does that relate with how a centenarian made it to 100 years of age? And how does that relate with the big numbers of epidemiology? So I think that very few people are taking this approach, and that's unfortunate because that's the only way you're going to truly help people. So, for example, 16 hours or 18 or 20 hours of fasting per day can be very beneficial for a little bit. But then, for most people, that's going to, in the long run, increase cardiovascular disease and shorten your life, right? So now you have something very good at the beginning becomes potentially very bad 20 years later, right? So that's what we're focusing on, not so much what you can do to be better today, but what you can do to be better today and, until you get to 110. So that's been the focus. And so, the fasting mimicking diet is 20 years of work and it's not just the way you fast, but it's like how long you fast, what's the composition of the diet, and what have we demonstrated in a clinical trial to do. So, for example, for diabetes, if you do monthly cycles of a fasting mimicking diet, you see a diabetes regression, you see patients reducing the A1C, you see patients reducing drug use. Yeah, so that's, that comes in a box. It's something tested, and now that food becomes a medicine for diabetes, but it becomes a very good medicine, right? Not a medicine with a lot of side effects, but a medicine that has minimal side effects and lots of beneficial effects. Yeah. So the diabetes is just an example. Then we're doing it for autoimmunities, we're doing it for Alzheimer, we're doing it for cancer, we're doing it for cardiovascular disease, et cetera, et cetera.
Is it always the same for the other diseases as well as diabetes?
No, it's not. Right? So there's one that is for everyone who does not have a disease, and that's the most tested fasting mimicking diet. And so usually the clinical trials, and now there are over 35 trials that have been completed. And they use this type of diet, which is 1,100 calories on day 1 and then 800 kilocalories on day 2, 3, 4, 5. But then, there's a version for autoimmunities, which is very different. And there's a version for Alzheimer, which is higher calorie and it's got different components. And the diabetes one is different from the one for regular people. So that's interesting because the people usually take a lot of drugs and then they want to improvise, right? And we're saying, well, maybe it's better to take less drugs or no drugs and have a real medicine or have a medicine that is helping you stay healthy rather than, become sick. And then, like, say, with GLP-1 and lots of other drugs, you become sick, and then you're trying to, manage the disease, right? That's a mentality right now. And we're saying, no, as long as you have many clinical trials and you've demonstrated something, that could be better than the drugs that are available right now.
So what is the mechanism of action? What are the key mechanisms that FMD is effective for improving longevity and overall health?
Yeah, so the mechanisms are multiple. On one side is, and this is why it's also important to understand the timing, right? So it's not about, you do this water only or you do this and that. That's just really pointless, because you could do water only fasting and metabolically is going to put you in a low energy expenditure mode, for example, right? If you do it for long enough. So that's one of the things the fasting mimicking diet targets, is to make sure that your metabolism, so you can have a fat storing metabolism, or you can have a fat burning metabolism, right? And so one of the jobs of the fasting mimicking diet is keep you in a fat burning metabolism, right? So that you're now insulin sensitive and not insulin resistant, and you're using fat versus accumulating fat. Also, the job of the fasting mimicking diet metabolically is to keep your energy expenditure high, right, or fairly high. We don't want to overall slow down your metabolism, because if you slow down the metabolism, now you're going to have a problem, and this problem could be lasting a long, long time. Then the fasting mimicking diet has the job of activating stem cells and activating these Yamanaka factors and other embryonic developmental factors that are making the cells younger and also able to regenerate at least parts of the system that has been tear down during the fasting process.
We spoke about you're still doing, and you've been doing a lot of studies. What are the most compelling clinical trial outcomes that is supporting FMD?
The most interesting ones are those on biological age. So we were able to show that the biological age markers were reduced in 2 different trials by 2.5 years. So people became, at least according to these markers, 2.5 years younger after 3 cycles of the fasting mimicking diet. Some of the other uses of the FMD are pre-diabetes and diabetes. So now there's maybe 5 trials on prediabetes and diabetes indicating that, as I mentioned earlier, insulin resistance is reduced or reversed, and A1C is reduced. And the interesting thing in diabetes and prediabetes, other than the decrease in drug use, is also being the lack of side effects, right? So the muscle loss and the bone density loss and lots of other problems that you see with GLP-1 agonist, so far we haven't seen them with the fasting mimicking diet. So, for example, there is no lean body mass loss. The great majority of the loss is in fat. Mm-hmm. And we also, many trials have been done on cancer, and cancer is much harder. There's many diseases, many hundreds of treatments, and so it's much harder to say this works on cancer. I think we're just beginning to show efficacy with breast cancer. We have now overall survival improvements in the fasting mimicking diet plus chemo group versus chemotherapy alone. But I think there's more studies need to be done. Actually, some of these studies have been done in Turkey on fasting and cancer treatment.
Speaking of which, actually, I just spoke with a dear friend. She's a well-grounded doctor. I said, do you have any question to Dr. Longo? I was speaking to a couple of people, and so many people have some questions, but one very critical question around cancer. She said that she's having a lot of pushback from oncologists because she's also doing a nutritional healing in a way, like you're exactly explaining. She does take an illness, whether diabetes or autoimmune disorders and whatnot, and trying to heal the person with food concentrated, not with medication. She's kind of concerned that if the cancer patient is going under treatment and they cannot do any strength work, any workout, and with the fasting mimicking diet, would they lose a lot of weight or their muscle mass? Therefore, they also have a pushback from oncologists.
Many trials have been done, and now my book called Fasting Cancer just came out in English. So for most patients, we don't see muscle loss, like I mentioned earlier. But it can happen, and it does happen in some cases. If a patient loses too much lean body mass, they may have to delay or postpone some of the fasting mimicking diet treatment until they're able to exercise and regain their muscle mass. But I think in general, we haven't seen this very much, right? So most of the trials show no lean body mass loss, but it's possible. And so the oncologists and the doctors should be ready to react and adjust. So, let's say that somebody was doing cycles every 3 weeks. One thing that can be done is to postpone, right? So skip a cycle of the fasting mimicking diet and only do the treatment, the rest of the therapy, and waiting for the patient to regain weight. Now, sometimes it's the opposite, right? So sometimes it is the fasting mimicking diet that is helping the patient. And this is what we saw in the mouse studies. So the fasting mimicking diet is preventing weight loss because it is protecting the patient from, or the mouse, from the chemotherapy toxicity and from the cancer growth. And so the weight loss is caused by cancer growth and sometimes by the therapy. And so if you reduce the growth and if you reduce the toxicity of the chemotherapy, then that can actually help the patient keep the weight. And this is something we've shown in the University of Geneva trial where the women were doing breast cancer. They were doing muscle training, and plus the fasting mimicking diet, plus a regular diet, they were actually gaining muscle mass, right? So that trial showed a progressive increase of muscle strength and muscle mass. So that's suggesting that in many cases, muscle loss is not a problem, but in some cases it could be.
For most diseases, as well as people who are pursuing a healthier life, let me call it that, instead of longevity, is it always the same protocol, like 5 days in a month, whether 3 cycles or 4 cycles or 12 cycles? So it's not 10 days, it's not 15 days, just 5 days? Yeah,
again, I think different people, different techniques and different reasons for it, right? So somebody is diabetic, then they're going to do something that is for diabetes, and that's once a month for the first year or so, maybe 6 months, maybe a year. And then it goes to maybe once every 2 months or every 3 months. And just a fasting mimicking diet. Then there is a everyday diet. Then there's something called time restricted eating. How many hours during the day do you eat? So all of those are modified based on the person and their needs and what they're trying to do, right? So, for what diabetes could be very, very different from cancer, very different from Alzheimer, and so on. So I think that it is personalized, and each patient receives something quite different.
So the regular product which is out there is not illness specific. It's more like general public to use. The
product out there is for the general public. Now it has many of the features of the products that, so it's like the central, it's a fasting mimicking diet. So it will still have a lot of the effects that the one for cancer or the one for autoimmunities will have, but it's not designed to treat a particular disease, but it's designed to keep you as healthy as possible or restore your health in some cases and make the system a little bit younger so that they can be more functional. That's the one for everybody. What
type of biological changes occurred in that 5 days to promote longevity?
Well, everything happens, right? So I always say, I challenge anyone to come up with something that could cause more changes in the human body than 5 days of fasting or a fasting mimicking diet. Glucose will go down, growth factors will go down, and some, growth factor regulating proteins will go way up. And, the liver function will completely change, and the fat cells begin to generate, break down, and then eventually generate ketone bodies. The metabolism of the brain changes. Everything changes. Right? Of course, you're going from using food coming from outside to using fat stored in the inside, and not just fat, also some coming out of muscle, right? And this is why people confuse, I've seen some podcasters, confuse the short-term effect of a fasting mimicking diet on muscle, which, is clear, it's not very much. But of course, after 5 days of a fasting mimicking diet, your muscle mass is going to slightly decrease, but then during the next 10 days, it's going to increase. And the evidence suggests that in that increase, you may have somewhat of a rebuilding of the muscle mass, right? Even though it's a small rebuilding, but it is a rebuilding. Different diseases and different uses have different application of the fasting mimicking diet.
You know, there is this whole protein push, let's say. I kind of keep changing my side depending who I'm listening in a way. Like I used to eat a lot of vegetables, then I started eating a lot of animal protein. And now I keep listening to you and you're like, you know what, actually it's not that great to eat so much animal protein. Why is it bad in your opinion? Actually, based on research, not just opinion, I guess.
So not only it has to be based on research, but it has to be based on multiple pillars, right? So, so if you look at the centenarians in Okinawa, in Italy, and lots of places in the Mediterranean, they all had low protein diets, right? And so this is true for Japan. Japan has has always had a low protein diet. Okinawa is a low protein diet, and Italy has historically had a low protein diet. And these countries have been, historically at least, at the very top of the longevity spectrum in the world, right? So that already gives you, a strong indication that high protein diet is not good. But if you look at how do you make a mouse or a rat live longer, low protein, low methionine. What about epidemiological studies? Well, in lots of epidemiological studies will suggest that at least a low protein diet, low but sufficient, right? I mean, you cannot be malnourished. So it has to be low but sufficient proteins. Even the epidemiological studies are generally in agreement with this. For example, Harvard published a few years ago 3 studies showing a 40 to 50% increase in diabetes in people that had a high animal protein diet. And they also showed lots of evidence for those on a low carb diet, low carb, high protein, high fat coming from animal, having a major increase in cancer risk, cardiovascular risk, overall mortality risk. This is epidemiological work by the Harvard School of Public Health. Unfortunately, some podcasters are looking at short-term effects, and they're confusing short-term effects with long-term effects. And so, yeah, you have to have enough protein, enough muscle training to not be frail, but then it has to be low enough so that you can live a long life, hopefully disease-free. Yeah.
Okay, I understand. So what is the appropriate level, you think, in a day?
The level is probably 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, with maybe 3/4 coming from plant proteins and 1/4 coming from animal proteins or so. People have to be careful because if you only eat legumes, let's say, they're very deficient in lots of amino acids. Plant-based protein should come from different sources. Mm-hmm. And the animal protein, I think the data suggests the best is fish. And our recommendation is maybe 3 or 4 times a week fish, rotating, don't have the same fish because different fish have different toxins associated with them. Probably not a good idea to eat, let's say, tuna 3 times a week because now that could have high mercury but different fish may give you a different type of toxin. And that's unfortunately the world we live in. So you have to rotate, so have 1 type of fish per week, but have it 4 times.
So how do you define aging? In your research, your hallmarks? Everybody keep changing the hallmarks, but which ones are you addressing?
I'm not a big fan of hallmarks. I think it's kind of like if you look at a car, you say, well, the tires are worn out. That's a hallmark of aging, right? Mm-hmm. And then somebody comes around, I will come around and say, you just change the tires, right? They don't worry too much about the fact that it's worn out. Change it. So they'll spend a lot of time figuring out why the tires are getting. So imagine that, right? So imagine if you have a car and I say spend a lot of time figuring out why the metal is the paint is becoming rusty or whatever, and spend a lot of time figuring out why the rubber is becoming thinner and is getting worn out, and spend a lot of time, looking at a lot of little problems, and I will come around and say, well, you can repaint the car and change the tires, right? And so the knowledge of why the paint is getting worse, it's really pointless. So then that's been our focus, and that's the focus of the fasting mimicking diet and lots of other things we do. There's going to be a million things that go wrong with aging. Don't worry about anyone individually. Worry about resetting the program that, makes you as young as possible, and also makes what we call the force of natural selection important. What does it mean? It means that there is this evolutionary force that always had the job to keep us so healthy that we can we can generate and take care of our offspring. At some point, that force goes down. It's less powerful. And so you want to keep that force as high as possible. Why? Because their force is controlling everything in the human body. This is why, almost nobody at 20 years of age gets sick of anything, right? That means that up to age 40 or so, that force is incredibly high, right? It's incredibly powerful at keeping everything perfect. And then after that, it goes down the drain. Yeah, so you want to postpone. And I think in some people, maybe those that are eating too much proteins, animal food and proteins, that force might go from 40 to 30. This is why we see a lot of, colorectal cancer, breast cancer in the 30-year-olds now, something that we didn't used to see 50 years ago. Yeah, so then maybe potentially this diet disruption is affecting the force of natural selection and is making that become weaker earlier, so that it allows you to get sick much earlier, which, was not the case before.
Yeah, you're right. We don't see yet the outcome of these new demands from humanity, let's say. So then let me ask you, if someone does 5 days of these fasting mimicking diets, how do they need to continue to their diet the rest of the 25 days?
We have the longevity diet, I think is also translated in Turkish, the book, The Longevity Diet, that tells you the ideal, pescetarian diet. And then, we do something we'll call 12-hour timer sitting, so eat within 12 hours a day, say 7 a.m., 7 p.m., 8 a.m., 8 p.m., 150 minutes of exercise, plus muscle training. That's the general recommendation of the longevity diet. Yeah.
Hold on, let's talk about that 12 hours window, because that sounds like normal eating, correct?
Yeah.
It used to be like that.
It sounds like normal eating, but nobody does it anymore, right? So if you look at the United States, and I'm sure Turkey is similar, people eat for about 15 hours a day, right? So nobody eats for 12 hours. Very few people eat for 12 hours a day, or let's say 11 to 12 hours a day. I mean, you can call it normal eating, but then we have to go back to that normal eating. So to most people, it is a change. It's not a big change. And that's important for us for that reason. It's less risky for safety, right, versus the 16 hours, as I mentioned earlier. If you fast for 16 hours, you're starting to see some problems associated with that, big problems.
Can you talk about these big problems?
The first one is the meta-analysis now showing association with increased cardiovascular disease, increased overall mortality. So people that do this long fast, if they involve skipping breakfast, they're associated with all these problems. But now the possibility, there is a new study that indicates that maybe it's not because of skipping breakfast. Maybe it doesn't matter if you skip dinner or breakfast. If you do 16 hours or longer of fasting per day, you're going to have problems. Some of my colleagues argue that it is because the people that skip breakfast, they may be fasting for 16 hours, but they're less healthy than everybody else. But my counter argument has been, if 16 hours is so beneficial to them, why don't they at least live normal lives? Right? Why they live shorter than everybody else? So it doesn't make any sense, right? There's something probably detrimental in the 16 hours, right? And it's also violating the dark light cycles. This is why we have 12 hours and 12 hours, and probably that circadian rhythms are ideal, right? So that's probably why we want to keep it at 12 hours. Much easier, much safer, not as effective short term, but very effective long term.
So do you suggest some calorie restrictions in between that 12 hours, or whatever the person needs? I don't want to say whatever they want to eat, but whatever their body energetically needs.
I think that people should focus on the outcome, meaning that if your abdominal circumference is getting out of range, and your BMI is getting out of range, and your fat percentage is getting out of range, then you're eating too much, right? The fasting mimicking diet can have tremendous help and may even solve the problem completely. But sometimes you also need the 12 hours. and you also need the longevity diet. And sometimes, you might also need something that I do Monday through Friday. I have, instead of lunch, I have a coffee for lunch, right? But I only do that when I'm gaining weight and I'm approaching like a higher BMI. So my BMI is 23.5. I try to keep it there. If I start becoming higher than that, then I intervene also with the Monday through Friday lunch skipping. So I have breakfast, I have a snack around 5 p.m., and then I have dinner, but I have coffee for lunch.
So you fast in the daytime as well, kind of?
Only when I'm gaining weight and I'm moving out of my ideal range, right? So if my BMI goes from 23.5 to 23.7.8, I can tell that I'm gaining, then I'll go to replacing lunch, either skipping lunch. I mean, I never skip anything, but I replace it with a very low calorie. It could be a coffee, it could be a healthy snack, or something like that. But the nice thing about that is also makes you less sleepy because, digestion takes a lot of energy. And so, for people that work during the day, it's not a bad thing to do considering the performance and just feeling energetic during the day.
Dr. Longo, how is it mimicking fasting? Because I did the Fasting Mimicking Diet, FMD. There, fair amount of things you keep eating all day long in a small calories, but you have at least 3 meals, kind of. It's not a meal, but there's stuff, there are things to drink to prevent the muscle loss. How does it mimic the fasting? Is it because of the calorie restriction, because of what we eat there?
Yeah, I mean, there is 2 parts of the fasting mimicking diet. One of them is the ingredients. So the ingredients are all taken from the Okinawa diet and the Mediterranean type of diets, right? So they're taking what were the ingredients that Turkish and the Greeks and the Italians and the Spanish ate traditionally, and they're associated with longevity, and also what were the ones that are also common at the table of Okinawans and Japanese, at least in the times that we had record longevity. So we start with that. And that was a good idea because a lot of these ingredients, let's say the nuts, the vegetables, the olive oil, right? So a lot of these are contributing they're not taking away from longevity, they're contributing to longevity. And then the fasting mimicking is basically, for example, certain carbohydrates can activate certain cellular pathways, and certain fats are healthy, but they do not interfere with the fasting response. Whereas protein, especially certain amino acids, do interfere. So sugars and amino acids interfere with the fasting response, and fats and certain fats don't interfere and may even promote health. So that the fasting mimicking diet looks about, giving you the ability to have a fasting response, just as if you were getting water-only fasting, but also making sure that you do it with healthy ingredients. And for example, the digestion, it takes a lot of energy, right? So one benefit of having food versus a water-only fasting could also be that you are you're burning energy because you're still digesting, and so you have these fibers, you have these healthy ingredients, but you have to keep the system working, so that helps you in the energy consumption, energy expenditure part, but it's at the same time giving you a lot of the benefits of fasting, right? So yeah, this has been the ideas behind it, but of course, in the end, we had to clinically test it and show that it was not just an idea, it was actually working in randomized trials. In a few days, we're going to publish on the role of the fasting mimicking diet in reversing chemosensory defects, like people that lost their sense of smell and taste. We show that after the cycle of the fasting mimicking diet, we restore this. So we have a lot of hypotheses, but then these hypotheses are tested in randomized clinical trial. This was a 100-patient trial done in Rome, a randomized crossover, right? So we had really 2 arms. So the first 50 patients, and then next, I think, 25 patients. So overall, 75 patients underwent 6 cycles of the fasting mimicking diet, showing really remarkable effects.
You know, somebody asked me also, another very well-respected doctor from the United States, she asked me to ask you that at some point you came out with this information that the data shows that FMD shows better cardio markers than regular fasting. And she said that, you know, they couldn't find the published document.
Regular fasting should not be used, right? It's not safe. It's just very difficult on people. I've done it once, and so I think unless you go to a clinic that specializes in water-only fasting, you should not do water-only fasting, right? I mean, we've seen so many people end up in the emergency room. You can have hypotension, hypoglycemia. I mean, there's so many reasons not to do a water-only fasting unless you go to a specialized clinic. The fasting mimicking diet is being shown to reduce cardiometabolic risk factors over and over and over and over. Now, we've never done the water-only fasting. And you know why we've never done the water-only fasting? Because we tried, right? The first trial at USC was water-only fasting in cancer patients. This is like 2010, 2011. And we thought, hey, they're going to be very motivated. They're going to do it. And nobody wanted to do it water-only fasting. I mean, they had cancer. We told them we expect this to be protective, and they still didn't want to do it. It took us forever to finish the trial. So we realized very early on, I mean, that's how the fasting mimicking diet was created, right? Because of the refusal by cancer patients to do water-only fasting. So once we saw that, then we went to the NIH and we asked for funds for a fasting mimicking diet. We realized that we were not going to be successful in any disease. Forget the cancer, but diabetes, prediabetes, diabetes prevention, longevity. Nobody was going to do the water-only fasting. It's a story for maybe 1 in 1,000 people, right? Maybe 1 in 1,000 people can do regular water-only fasting. So we were looking for something that 60, 70% of people can do. And that's what the trials are showing, right? So this is why we abandoned the idea of water-only fasting very early on. For safety reason, but also for compliance reason. And then we embraced this fasting mimicking diet. And now millions of people have done it. And the results, both from the clinical trials, but also from out there, what we receive from the people are very, very good. I think it's probably best to stick with the FMD. Also because it allows the professionals to make sure that people don't improvise. I mean, water-only fasting also allows people to say, you know what, I'm just going to do a month of this, right? That's very dangerous, right? Very dangerous, because people, sometimes they think because, let's say, I do a few days of water-only fasting, it's good for me. If I do 10 times more, it's going to be even better, right? It removes the professional from the ability to protect people. That's another component that is extremely dangerous because again, we've seen it with cancer, but we also see it with diabetes. So, for example, if you are a diabetic that receives insulin, let's say you decide to do water-only fasting at home. I mean, if you do a fasting mimicking diet, you're going to be told by your doctor and by the nutritionist, do not combine the injection of insulin with the fasting mimicking diet, right? Very bad idea. If you do it, you have to do it in a very careful way, use a continuous glucose monitor, be monitored by the doctor. But if this is done at home, now somebody could say, hey, I'm just going to do water-only fasting and then inject insulin. And we're talking about millions and millions of people, right? And people can actually die from this combination, right? You could die from a combination of water-only fasting and injecting insulin. Because why? Because your insulin resistance can be reversed very quickly. And the same dose of insulin now is so much more able to decrease your glucose level that you could end up with hypoglycemia and actually death, right? So I'm trying to scare people, but that's a reason. I'll give you another example. We had one person that said, you know what, I did water-only fasting and for however many days. And then I got on the highway and I almost passed out while I was driving on the highway, right? So this is just some examples of things that we've seen. That's one of the problems with improvising at home. You're going to get more bad than good. You're still going to get good, right? If somebody can do 5 days of water-only fasting, there's going to be a lot of benefits, but there's also going to be a lot of problems.
I see. Okay. Well, that was very descriptive, I guess. So someone like me, I have a good supplement regimen. I consider myself fairly healthy, but I want to do the FMD. The first time I heard about it, it was like, do not drink coffee, don't take any of your supplements, just do this. Well, after a while, that's also not realistic. Every month, 5 days, or a couple of times a year. Does it not work if you do continue taking your supplements and if you drink your morning coffee but still do the FMD?
The idea of the FMD, one of the important things is to get away from your routine, right? We are in a world that emphasizes making everything easier, right? But I think that there is also an important aspect of having some effort required, right? So for coffee or anything else that you do, the idea is stop, right? Stop for 5 days. That's okay, right? I mean, unless it's something that the doctor prescribes and it's necessary. But if not, we say stop. And then the rule is, if you're going to stop the fasting mimicking diet, then, okay, do whatever it is needed to get to the end of it, right? So some people might say, I need a coffee every day, otherwise I cannot finish it. Okay, then have a coffee. So I think it's better to have the coffee and finish it than stop it so that you can have the coffee. And the supplements and all of that, stop everything in the 5 days, right? Most people are going to do this 3 times a year. That's 15 days a year. There's no need to take any supplements for those 15 years, with the exception of the drugs that are prescribed by the doctor. And if you're taking drugs, I think you need to be, as I just mentioned for insulin, you need to really push your physician to understand what we're talking about here, because it's not just insulin that could be problematic. I mean, we don't really see many problems with other drugs, but I think it's good for people that take many drugs to keep in mind that there are drug interactions, but there are also drug-diet interactions.
All right. But it's just like a cleanse in a way you're talking about, like 5 days of a cleanse that people need. If they're going to do it, they should do the right way. But not doing it the right way, that's what I was trying to ask.
Right. I mean, I hate this word because it's just, the word cleanse, right? So it just doesn't mean anything, right? I mean, it's a story that it's being created out there by people that are trying to sell things. I mean, things have to be clinically tested over and over and over, and they have to be done in mice, in animal studies, and then in clinical studies randomized by big universities that do not have influence by a company, right? And then and only then, I think you get a good picture of what you have in front of you. Is it working? Is it not working? Stay away from ideas because, again, they're going to do as much bad as they do good to you.
Okay, let's put the cleanse word aside. I'm asking you all the cellular benefits that we were talking for the last, let's say, 50 minutes. Wouldn't that happen if the person kind of keeps their routine besides the food?
Yeah, most of it will happen. Some of it might not happen, but I think you're not going to get the full effect. Mm-hmm. Also because a good part of the effect, maybe not a big part, but a part of the effect is the psychological component, right? So if you go running for 5 kilometers, right, you can say, let's say that I had a pill. I have the jogging pill. Will it be a good idea to tell people don't go running anymore? I don't think so, right? I think even if you had a pill that could replace running, you still want to go running, right? Because there's a psychological effect of the challenge of having to do these 5 kilometers. If it was 50 kilometers, I will agree with people, say, hey, this is very difficult, right? Who can do that? But if it's a 5 kilometers or walking for an hour, let's say I have a pill that replaces my walk, 1 hour walk, right? So this is very similar, right? Having to skip supplements or coffee, it's a minor effort that I think it's important for somebody to say, I can stay away from all of this for 5 days. Now, again, if you cannot, it's okay. It's not gonna take away. It's gonna take mostly the psychological component away. Now, if you're taking supplements of a certain kind, we don't know, because one of the supplements could be problematic to be combined with a fasting regime, right? So for example, you could take a supplement and then all of a sudden you might get gastrointestinal issues because normally they should be taken with lots of food, right? So those are also complications that come in because let's say you take a lot of vitamin C, right? Then all of a sudden the vitamin C could be problematic because your stomach is empty, or you have different ingredients in your stomach that are not necessarily reacting appropriately with the high dose vitamin C. So I think that probably best to skip it, but yeah, you must have it, then do what you have to do.
Dr. Longo, we're in Turkey, and I have a variety of people who are listening to me, and sometimes the negative feedback that I take is that you're talking about a product, but we're not able to get it. Sometimes financially, sometimes they don't have the reach. For these people who are not able to get the FMD, what would be your suggestion to do instead?
Yeah, my suggestion, I think if they do the longevity diet, which is free, and they do the time-restricted eating, maybe instead of doing 12 hours, they could do 11 hours. That's already a very good way to go. It doesn't cost anything. And they should see tremendous effects. 150 minutes a week of exercise, 1 hour a day of walking, the longevity diet, so a fish plus vegan, and then say 11 hours of time-restricted eating, or maybe 12 hours. So eat for 11 or 12 hours a day. That should already make big changes to their health, and it doesn't cost anything.
Who should not use the FMD?
People that are underweight, people that have eating disorders like anorexic, people that are old. So we used to have 70 as the cutoff, but now we're saying, well, we just finished a trial on older patient with Alzheimer. So yeah, say after 70, it'd be good to talk to your doctor and make sure that you're healthy enough and young enough to do it. But usually we put 70 as a cutoff age. For every disease, liver, if people have liver disease, have kidney disease, probably not a good idea to do it, but it could be very helpful. We just published a paper on both kidney and liver. It could be helpful, but you need the specialist to make sure that you can sustain the fasting mimicking diet. So it can help you, but it could also hurt you if your liver or kidney are so damaged they cannot sustain the fasting period.
You said that you're just out with your book of fasting cancer. How is it helping to heal? What does it do to cancer cells? Yeah,
so the FMD makes cancer cell much more sensitive to the whatever therapy cancer patients are receiving, right? So I mean, of course, we know this very well in mice. In people, there's still a lot of work to be done. I mean, most of the work has been done for triple-negative breast cancer, the most aggressive breast cancer. And in that case, Vernieri group and others have shown almost a doubling in overall survival. These are still small trials, right? So bigger trials are needed, but we always say cancer patient many times they cannot wait. So if you cannot wait, I think you should talk to your oncologist and ask them to consider the fasting mimicking diet. Now, we're not crazy about recommending it to patients that are stage 1. We're basically saying stage 1, maybe stage 2, if there are surgeries and other interventions that are highly likely to cure you, maybe stick with that, stick with the standard of care, something there's 98% chance of curing you. You may not want to do anything differently, including the fasting mimicking diet. But as stage 3, stage 4 metastatic cancers, that's where I think I would definitely talk to the oncologist and ask him or her to consider adding the fasting mimicking diet to the standard therapy.
It was an eye-opener for me. I know I couldn't convince you with my coffee and supplements, but I think I'm going to continue that way because I want to add that to my regimen, not only for one time, but doing more time in a year. I'm in that pursuit of being healthy, and we have Alzheimer's disease, diabetes in the family, and I should do whatever I can in order to keep everything under control. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's very early over there, and thank you for accepting my invitation, and thank you for creating such an incredible product. So not only people under research are benefiting from it, but so many people around the world are.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Hopefully it helps people. Yeah.